Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. In today's tutorial, I want to show you how to create and export clouds out of Blender using the VDB format. This particular tutorial is going to go through effectively simulating and creating clouds, and then we can actually cache them and take that cache to use it as a VDB in your project of choice, in your software of choice, like Unreal Engine or Blender or Maya or 3ds Max. Sorry, we're generating it in Blender, so of course you can use it in Blender. But what I'm trying to say is that if you don't have access to Embergen, which is a paid software, then you can create the same type of clouds in Blender, although with a bit more difficulty, but definitely with some very powerful tools. So we'll start doing that, and then later on in the video, I'm also going to show you how to quickly import that into Unreal Engine and how to use it with the CloudForge, which is the plugin that I have for Unreal Engine in using realistic clouds. So this is actually quite a handy tutorial because it comes hand in hand with you creating your own clouds for the CloudForge or just in general for Unreal Engine or any other type of software. So this is actually quite detailed, so we're going through every step of the way. I'm going to hold your hand effectively so you understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then by the end of it, you should be okay and you should be able to create your own clouds. So let's begin. What we do is we start off in Blender with a basic scene, and I'm using Blender 4.1, so that's fine if you want to use that. Now the next thing, we want to delete the camera and the light source, and we have this cube, which is just great for what we're doing. Next up, select the cube and then go into the physics properties and turn it into a fluid. Then set the fluid to a domain, and this will turn the fluid into the cube into a domain for our simulation. After this, you don't really need to do anything until we have gotten later on in the process. For our base mesh, we are going to use a plane. This is going to be the foundation for our cloud. And what we want to do is we want to add more geometry to the plane. So we're going to go into edit mode, and then we're going to right click and click subdivide, and then do about 100 subdivisions, which will give us about 10,000 faces, which you can see down here in the statistics panel. After that, we can move on to address creating our cloud islands. We need to randomly select faces on our plane. So we're going to switch over to face mode, and then we're going to press the select button, and then over here, select random. Now we can use this ratio to basically select various different amounts on the plane. We can also press Control plus or Control minus to further enhance our selection. Maybe something like that. Once we've done the selection, we can do Control I on the keyboard to invert, then press X on the keyboard and select faces, which will delete all the other faces that we didn't want, thus leaving us with these islands. Next step, we want to start elevating some of these cloud islands. So we're going to use the same process of select random. And then again, we're just going to increase or decrease our amount of selection by using Control plus or Control minus. And then I'm going to press E on the keyboard and then on the Z axis to go up, something like that. We can also select some other parts of the mesh. Again, select random, and then we could, with this selection, maybe make it a little bit smaller, something like that. Now we can press Alt-E on the keyboard and select extrude individual faces, which then will allow us to extrude in different directions. But just make sure that you're actually using a scale, just make sure you're still using the Z-axis, something like that. And then once you're happy with the amount of extrusion you've done, you should be able to then move on to the next step. So I'm just going to do it one more time. Control S, minus, and then extrude again. Something like that would be enough. And for our next step, we are going to go back into object mode, and with it selected, we are going to the modifier tab, adding a new modifier and searching for a solidify modifier. And this will just leave it where it is at 0.01. This is going to help us to build this geometry a lot better. We're then going to add a remesh modifier as well, and then make sure you set this up to like a 0.02 or something like that in order to get that that geometry back. Maybe 0.01, something along those lines. While in voxel mode should be just fine. You can still have a look at playing around with the adaptivity of it, or just leave it as it is. You can also play around with this particular sliders of the thickness on the solidify modifier. So maybe you want to go for like a 0.1 or something like that, but again, it's really up to you, because the more you add on there, the more faces you're going to have. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to too many faces, but you just really got to experiment on your own with some of this stuff. So maybe something like that, and 0.01 on the voxel. Yeah, something like that, because we're then going to rejig this again by, applying these particular two modifiers by pressing Control A while hovering over them. And then we can add a displace modifier, so something like that. And then we can use a texture, a cloud texture. So to do that, we'll press the new button over here and then press this button over here that takes us to our texture. And we're able to then select clouds within the list and then play around with these settings until you get the clouds that you're looking for. I would definitely look at making sure that in the modifier tab, you're not displacing this for too much. So maybe try a 0.3, 0.4, something like that. And then going again back in the texture and modifying this a bit further. Once you're happy with the result on here, you can then do another remesh. So let's say we're happy with this particular result. We can then apply the modifier and add a new remesh modifier, again 0.01 here, which will give us better shapes. Now you're seeing that there's some cubes and stuff around here which we'll need to resolve as well. But again, you can do this by adding even more displacement like that. And then this displacement can use the same texture that we used before. But again, punching down on the actual strength, so maybe a 0.2. And then once you're happy with that one, add another remesh, again 0.01. Make sure you do start so sort of like applying these subdivision, these modifiers, because otherwise it will just get too heavy for you to in terms of calculations. And make sure that your overall cloud is not bigger than the actual cube. Every time you scale an object, it's actually good practice to just Control A and reset all transforms as well. Now we're going to refine the shape a little bit more. So we're going to be adding another displace modifier, but in this particular time we're going to do it at the bottom. So we're going to go to the side view like that and press Alt Z to see through. Do go into edit mode with Alt Z. You can then select all of these bottom faces over here, and then in the object data you can add a new vertex group like that. Press the plus button and then assign, and this has added a new vertex group. And then if you come out of this mode and out of edit mode, you can now add a new modifier, which is obviously a displace modifier. And this one, we're going to select the vertex group because we only want to affect the bottom. We're going to use the same texture that we used before, and I am going to decrease that strength. And as you can see, it's only really displacing at the bottom. You do want to play around with some of these settings because you don't, you know what I mean? Like you can see how it could be affecting this particular mesh quite badly if you're not careful. So you want to play around with a mid-level, sorry. Until you get the sort of effect that you're looking for. I would also edit that texture and probably make it a bit smaller, maybe something like that, so you get a bit more detail at the bottom. And then going back to the modifier and again playing around with these settings a little bit more, maybe something like that. Once that's done, we can add a new remesh modifier. So far it's not a, we're not destroying the workflow. Make it quite small so you can see all the granular details that we get in there. We can now apply both of these modifiers, and further artistically enhancing this, we can now go into sculpt mode and add some more. We can do some more in there. So if we actually switch over to the sculpting tab, we can use like a brush like this elastic deform or this snake hook to kind of drag around on the mesh. So let's say you're trying to create some shapes that are maybe going up, or create some more variation. Maybe your clouds are more like mountains looking, you know what I mean? So it's got quite a bit of displaced shapes like that, something like that, maybe we're just gonna do something along those lines. Yeah. Once that's done, you can go back into the layout mode. And now, again, you will need to do a remesh modifier because we have lost quite a lot of the detail. We've extended a lot of the mesh around. So once that's done in this particular way after sculpting, we can then do another displace modifier. Again, using that texture that we had before, decrease some of its strength, maybe to like a 0.2, something like that. But then go into the actual texture and start playing around with the size of it. None of the other settings will do anything really for you apart from depth. So depth is going to help to add a bit more high frequency detail, as you've noticed. Once that's also added, go back into the modifier stack, apply these particular modifiers that we've added, and then do another remesh. And then this, we're going to do a 0.007, so we get even more resolution. So yeah, I think I like that. But again, continue doing displacements until you get the look of a cloud, really, as much as possible after doing displacements. So, 0.2 seem to be quite nice. That's okay. We can also add another displace here. And then this time we're going to use the same texture, but we're also going to only do it on the y-axis, for example. And we're also going to use the vertex group that we set up previously, like that, in order for us to be able to only offset on one direction. What you're noticing also is the fact that it's not really doing much. And I'm just going to look to see on a different axis. Yeah, I'm just looking at... Doesn't seem like the strength of this is really doing much, so that's a bit unfortunate. Let me just apply the remesh in the other displace, and then having a look to see why is this particular one not affecting anything. So I think I just need to add it again. Search for a displace, make sure that we're using the texture and that we're using the group that we wanted. It would be interesting if we... Yeah, I think I need to actually reselect this. Yeah, it seems like I have to reselect this, go back into our object data and assign again, and then go back into the modifier. And now I should be able to edit this. Yeah, as you can see now it's happening, but we're only going to do it on one axis. So I am thinking we'll do it on the y-axis. And we're going to push it in sort of like that direction, which is fine. And then we can have a look at the, yeah, you see what I mean? So I'm trying to create a bit of like a trailing effect in here. Definitely decrease a little bit on the strength side. And I think that's fine. We can now apply it. And then again, doing a remesh. Every time do a remesh at 0.008. And that's quite a nice sort of shape right there. Yep, I like that. Let's continue. Further enhance our shape, what I like to do is, after applying this remesh, I'm going to add another deform, and I'm going to do like a warp. And then this warp could be, sorry, not a warp. Let me just have a look. We'll do, yeah, a wave would be quite an interesting one. So the wave, the way this works is that you can sort of like, create the waviness of it, obviously. But what we're trying to do is like see how much of a curve we can sort of like do in here inside the mesh. So we're getting a bit more layers, some more layers of stacked sort of mesh, something like that. So as you can see, we're now increasing that level of cloud going upwards, and then we're also creating this hole down here. So we can then have a look. Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, something like that. And then we can actually apply this and then do another. I think it's very important that you do another remesh after this as well. And again, 0.008 should be fine. Actually, no, I think a 0.1, no, 0.01, sorry, is probably going to be a bit better, because we are trying to simplify some of this geometry as well. So I think that's fine. And then I think after that, we're going to add another displace modifier, use the texture, decrease the strength to maybe like a 0.2. Yeah, something like that. So add more granular detail, and then we can apply both of these as well. Right, okay, so that's a pretty good sort of base there for us to generate our cloud from. Now we can proceed to the next step. A little bit of self-advertisement here, but if you guys are interested in purchasing projects for Unreal Engine, for Space, or for Blender, like Nebula generators or VDB Cloud, then head on over to my Linktree page. With the description is in the link, sorry, is in the description below. But you can access my Patreon page that has all my projects, the Unreal Engine Marketplace, Blender Market, ArtStation, or Gumroad, where all of my projects are available. So yeah, take a look if you'd like to sample some of my projects. They're actually, I think, quite reasonably priced. So we already have the domain and we have the mesh. So now it's time to integrate the mesh further, inside the actual domain here, something like that. And then we can go over into the physics tab of this mesh and then press the fluid and select flow. which you can now see that it's already generating smoke in there. We can have a look at playing around with some of the settings on the domain. Like, for example, we might want some vorticity to the cloud, or we might want some noise and things like that. But this is not necessarily as important right now. What is important is that we make sure that everything is set up properly. So, for example, the volume emission of this, we want to set that to 1, so we get more inside the mesh. We're going to get more generated smoke in there. Obviously, this mesh could still be edited if we want to from this point. We are going to hide it though, so this is what we're saying. Now, in order for us to properly see the cloud, we do need to add a material to the domain, not the mesh, the domain itself. So we're going to do a very basic material to start off with. So I'm just going to go over here into the material tab. We already have a material set up in the sense of it's added to the domain, but it's using a principal BSDF. So I'm going to delete that and instead add a volume. So I'm going to use a principled volume for now. Going to connect this over into the volume slot, and we can actually play around with the density of this as well if we want to, but you're not really able to see anything because we're not in render mode. So for us to go into render mode, we're going to click this button over here, change the render engine from EV to cycles, and make sure that we're using a GPU if you have one, because that's going to speed up the process. Once that's done, we can actually click this button over here to go into render mode, and that's where our cloud is. Now, we could increase the density so we can see the shape a bit more. Bear in mind that this resolution of this cube is very low, so in terms of the actual output resolution, it's quite low. We can actually increase that to like 128, which will give us, as you can see, a far higher resolution. And this is how the cloud will kind of behave now at 128. Now, what you also want to do is you want to start sort of baking some effects into it. So if we, for example, increase this vorticity, this is going to further change the cloud shape by adding some more fuzziness to each of the edges. But you only really are going to see this if you're actually going to do a proper sort of like bake. So in order for us to do that, we're going to go down here to the bake options. We're going to click the is resumable option and also change this from replay to modular. Now it's expecting to bake some data. So we're going to only bake about 5 frames. So from frame 1 to frame 5. I'm also going to set up the timeline from frame 1 to frame 5. And now I am going to press the bake data button. And this, as you can see, has got a progress bar and it's going to actually fill this bake. And we will be able to see our cloud once the bake is done. So let's see, that's now done, and this is how the cloud looks like if it's baked at this resolution. So it's quite nice. I would say it's quite okay. We do need some lighting in the scene in order to see it, though. So if we go over here and change the shader to the material to the world material, we can add a sky texture in here, and we can actually use the Nishita one. If we plug that over into the color, this will give us a sky, and now you're able to actually see this cloud. You'll notice that there are some visible sort of grids around it, and that's because the grids are there because of the resolution of the actual cloud. So if you increase the resolution, instead of doing 128, but you'll do a lot higher, then you'll be able to see this at a higher resolution, so thus the cloud will have a better shape. We do have like these sort of artifacts around here, and in order for us to fix that, one thing that you could do is if you press the free data over here, and actually you go back into the plane, and then you take the volume emission to 0 instead of 1, that should in theory fix it. We do need to bake it again though, once you've done that. Every time you press the free data button, you will need to rebake your cloud. So once that's done, once the bake is finished, we should be able to see it again without that. And now you can see that the error there has been fixed, but we have lost some of the thickness of the cloud, which is a bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. We're going to switch back to object mode, and again, this is the density. That was a very high density, so you can see that adding more density does actually improve how the cloud looks like. There are things that you can do to improve the volume resolution. So over here in the render settings, you can actually add more light paths to volume. Right now it's set at 0, so you could do that to maybe like an 8. And also when it comes to actual volumes right down here, you can actually set the step render of the viewport and the render to something much lower. So for example, if we do 0.1, the volume will look better, but also the render will take longer if you increase this value, this will take a lot faster to render, but it will also look a lot worse. So I think keeping it at 1 is fine as a balance. Now, because we're working with a lower resolution cloud for the minute, it's time to do some bit of an experimentation. So what I also want to do is in the scene, add a new effect. So we're going to look for a force field, and we're going to look for like a turbulence. And then we can select the turbulence, go into its properties, set the strength to maybe something like a 6, and then the size to 2 maybe. And you could probably press with, play with some noise amount as well, and then go over to the cube, delete the data and bake it again, just so you can see what the turbulence does. Again, if you want, you can decrease this resolution further if you want this this sort of render to go even faster. You do need a few frames to render in order for us to see an effect. Now it seems that the turbulence has been way too minimal, so we're probably going to have to select it again and maybe use a size of 1 instead of using a size of 2. So I'm going to free data, bake it again, see what that looks like. Again, this is going to be a trial and error because every cloud is going to be different in its own right, and you're going to, obviously find your own way of how you want to produce it. Yeah, turbulence doesn't really seem to affect it that much, which is a bit unfortunate. I'm going to have a look. So maybe a higher power will do the trick. I'm still going to play around with these settings and see what that looks like. Now, if for some reason your turbulence is not working, or you don't really see the fuzziness of the vorticity added, then you need to allow for the animation to play further. So one thing that I would like you to do is first switch over from modular to replay. And once you do this, now this is going to be live. And then you want to do maybe like 100 frames instead of, just 5. And then have a look again at 100 frames here. And once you start playing around the animation, you'll be able to see the clouds being formed in sort of like real time. This also could completely, chug your computer down. So just be careful with that. And as you play around, you might not be able to see anything. So as you can see here, it's not actually displaying anything. And that's because we just don't have enough of a, like if you look at the turbulence in here, this might be affecting it too much, or the mesh itself is not generating anything, or the resolution might be too high. So you might want to turn that down to maybe like 36 or something like that, just to be able to see it, and decrease your vorticity as well to 0, just to, again, to be able to see the mesh and start playing. And now you can see it as it's sort of like building up. The cloud is actually sort of like building up, so you can see that's affecting something. Again, try a vorticity of maybe 0.4, go back to 0 and start it again, and just kind of have a look to see when did the clouds actually start breaking apart. And that's where you want to like go around and play around with the turbulence. So maybe add a 25 there and a size of 1, and then going back to 0 and redoing it again. And you can see right about frame 13, something like that, that's when the cloud becomes quite affected by the turbulence and by the vorticity. So I'm going to like increase the domain here so it's a bit bigger, and then I'm going to do another one of these replays, go back to square one and do that. And maybe this is what we need, but again, the resolution is too low for us to see, so I'm gonna put it to 128 and see if I'll be able to notice it then. So I'm doing it now, 3, 4, 5, just waiting for actual frames to build up all the way until the point where it reaches the the level that I want. So right now we can see everything up to like frame 9, and we can keep going maybe to like, let's see, we'll continue now to animate, and it reached, yeah, frame 12, maybe 13 there. Yeah, so we've got 13 frames. So if this is kind of the level that you're looking for, so let's just try and crank up that density so we can see it further. Maybe something like that, so you can just see how the cloud looks like now. If this is not the shape that you're looking for and you need a shape that's further behind, you can always sort of like go back to the beginning frames, which is around here, and you can have a look and see what would be maybe something like that, like the final sort of output. And now we can play around with further with the actual resolution. Obviously, this is way too many, density-wise, is way too high, so it's going to look quite bad. So we definitely need to work on that. But yeah, a resolution of 256 at frame 7 seems to be just fine. So I'm just going to put that to frame 7. So the animation only plays till there. I'm going to put this over to frame 7 and then change this from replay to modular. And we can actually press again the bake data, which will now bake everything all the way to frame 7. And in theory, that should look exactly what it did before. And you can see it does. So this is what cloud we have at frame 7 now moving forward. Again, this is it's very important that in case it doesn't work with baked data, you're not really getting any effects from a turbulence or vorticity, then your solution is effectively to switch over from modular to replay in order for you to be able to see that. We're going to try to bake the data with a vorticity of 1 and just see what that looks like. Again, this works very fast at 256 because the resolution is quite low, but I would definitely recommend that you push for something like a resolution of 512 or something like that. So yeah, I think a vorticity of 1 actually looks quite nice. We do need to be able to see the cloud a bit more, so I'm just playing around with the anisotropic, changed a little bit the lighting on it just to be able to see if we can spot some more shapes. You can see there's plenty of shapes within the cloud itself. It's quite nice. I'm going to now do a bake at 256 and see what that looks like. I would definitely recommend that you save the project before continuing from this point onward. Okay, and now we can see here we've got the cloud at 512 resolution, and it's looking really nice. Like if we play around with this material a little bit, just to really showcase it. I mean, I really like how it turned out. It will be quite interesting to see what this looks like in like an Unreal Engine or something like that, and also how it will look like in a render. But we do need to set up a new material for it so that it looks a lot better. So I'm going to quickly show you a material which actually works quite well for something like this, which I have actually covered up in another tutorial before, which I will link in the description below. So this material I have now added. So I'm going to, with the cube selected, I'm going to change my material from that one to this called Cloud Pre-Made. And once we click it, it will take a little bit of time for it to load, but this should apply the material as it is from my project. And this is what we've got. Let me just make it a little bit bigger here so you can see it. So we've got a light path connected to these nodes like that. We're also using an attribute node. And now we have to look at playing around with this sort of setting in here in terms of the density. So let me just have a look in terms of getting a better result. Now, if you don't clamp this, if you unclamp it, you will be able to properly see over here the density. Just have a look at the material. Make sure that you copy it as it is. And I'm just going to try and get a bit closer in here, maybe decrease this density. It's a bit too much. Maybe something like a 1.5 or maybe a 2. So this is what the cloud looks like with this particular setup, and it's also a very high quality cloud. I'm also going to do a quick render here, by the way, just so we can get a better understanding of it, like a better view. But I am going to switch over to world and just ensure that we are... Sorry, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to actually play around with the ozone. Not the air. It seems that these massive changes to the this has just kind of locked Blender up, but there we go. We're gonna turn on the ozone so we get a better, nice ozone layer. And I am going to add like a camera in here, so I'm able to move this camera around just to put it into a better position to see the cloud, maybe something like that. Just we're looking at it, and then we're going to go into our render settings over here, and I do want to make sure that I'm doing about 256 frames. I don't want to do more than that, using the noiser, and I'm also going to set the state render to a 0.1 so we get a better volume, and I'm going to look at light paths, maybe give it 12 and 12. That should be fine. We'll see what that looks like in the render. Just make sure that you do switch over to a viewport, like unrender mode, onto a like this particular view mode, which is the shading, so you don't lose performance. And then I'm just going to press F12, sorry, to start the rendering. This shouldn't take too long for it to happen, but I'll show you guys the end result. And here we go with the render. This is a render done at 1080p resolution. It took about almost 6 minutes to do this frame, but obviously we do have a very high detailed material in here for the cloud. So I'm really happy with it. Now what we're going to do is just going to put this in Unreal Engine, just so we can see what that looks like in there as well. So for us to be able to export this and, for example, use it in Unreal Engine, what we need to do is, because we've actually cached this particular simulation, we can click the cube over here and then head on over to the physics properties. And down here where it's got this path, you can actually press this button and then copy this particular link here, bring it over into a folder of yours, like like an Explorer, and just paste that link. You can then open the data on this, and these are the VDB caches that were generated from our simulation. So the number 7 here is the one that we're actually looking at in the viewport. So this is the one that we want to use somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this into Unreal Engine and upload it in there. Again, I do have tutorials for how to show you how to do the imports and set up for the CloudForge, for example, and Unreal Engine, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to skip over that particular little topic because there's no point in dwelling on it since the tutorial already exists. So I'm in Unreal Engine and I'm in the CloudForge project. Now I've got my VDB over here. If I want to bring in this VDB, I'm just going to drag and drop it over here, and then this importer will show up. Now I am going to only load just not the sequence, but just one file. Make sure we set everything to 8-bit very quickly. Set everything to none in all of these fields, because this is just how Blender kind of exports these out, but unfortunately we're just gonna have to set everything to none, and then just do the R channel, which is the red channel, over into density. And then over here, if you can, click the import button, just select anything from this panel and just press tab on the keyboard, which will move you to the import button, and then press enter. And now the cloud is here, as you can see it right here, and we can select this particular blueprint, and I can now drop the cloud over here. So if you have the CloudForge, you're able to do that very quickly. And here is the cloud, the one that we brought from Blender. Let me just have a look. So it's quite fuzzy. I mean, this is the vorticity at work right here. This is what's causing these sort of like nicely done sort of small details, small scale details. Now, if you want to play around with that even further inside Blender, then feel free to do that. But yeah, this is what the cloud will look like in Unreal Engine, especially with the CloudForge setup that I've got in here. So if you're interested in using this setup, feel free to have a look on my Unreal Engine Marketplace or ArtStation or Gumroad or my own website in order to get it. I find that this is really nice. And again, this is a cloud shape that we've done. We can work and create some more effects onto it. But it's not too bad. It's not bad, and we can improve the resolution even further. So I definitely would do like a 1024 resolution. So over here in Blender, where we have that the ability to actually bake, I would do 1024 instead of 512 if you want to get an even higher resolution of this VDB. So I hope you guys enjoyed that and you found it quite useful. If you have any questions, please leave a comment in the section below and I will definitely answer it. I am quite curious to know what you think about this technique and if you have any tips on how to improve it. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, please have a look at the CloudForge in the description below. And also, you're going to find in the in the description below, you're going to find the shader that I've used for the clouds for this particular Blender project. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Again, if you want to support and get access to all my projects, you can just join Patreon and you get access to everything that I've got in my library. So I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.